The O5 Council is the most powerful body in the SCP Foundation's universe, and almost nothing about it is actually known. 13 seats, 13 designations, no names, no faces, no biographies. By design, because an organization built around containing the incomprehensible decided early on that its own leadership needed to be incomprehensible too. What we do know comes from leaks, redacted memos, and the occasional document that escaped the editing process. And what those fragments add up to is a portrait of an institution willing to do almost anything to keep the world from finding out what it's hiding. Here are 13 of the most significant secrets buried inside the Council's structure, ordered by how deeply each one threatens to expose what the O5 Council actually is. Protocol 12 and the Class D assembly pipeline. Protocol 12 governs how the Foundation acquires its disposable test population, primarily death row inmates extracted from the world's prison systems and reclassified as Class D personnel, expected to perform high-risk testing duties with a survival rate the Foundation has never published, and almost certainly never will. The anomalous paradox at the heart of Protocol 12 is bureaucratic rather than cosmic. A global humanitarian organization runs an execution by experimentation pipeline through legal frameworks borrowed from capital punishment systems, and every government that quietly hands prisoners over to Foundation custody is participating in something they have agreed never to ask questions about. The key players are the O5 Council members who periodically review and reauthorize Protocol 12 without amendment, alongside the ethics committees whose objections are documented and then ignored. There is no single architect. Protocol 12 survives because reauthorizing it requires less institutional courage than dismantling it. The lore connectivity of Protocol 12 is the Foundation's original sin made procedural. Every other secret on this list involves something cosmic or world-ending. Protocol 12 is just cruelty, scheduled and renewed in committee, and its mundanity is exactly what makes it so revealing about the Council's priorities. They will spend unlimited resources containing a god. They have never spent the same resources asking whether Class D personnel deserve to be treated as people. The Foundation's external messaging emphasizes its humanitarian mission constantly. Protocol 12 is the document that exists specifically so nobody outside a narrow clearance band has to reconcile that messaging with the actual supply chain underneath it. The Department of Abnormalities erasure. The Department of Abnormalities was an early administrative body within the Foundation's structure, predating much of the bureaucracy that exists today, and its records were systematically purged at some point in the Foundation's institutional history. What it was investigating, why it was dissolved, and what happened to the personnel who staffed it are questions the current O5 Council has never publicly answered, and the gaps in the documentary record are clean enough to suggest the erasure was deliberate rather than accidental. The key players are whoever sat on the Council during the department's dissolution, individuals whose designations have themselves been scrubbed from the relevant records, which is its own kind of confirmation that something worth hiding happened. The lore connectivity of the Department of Abnormalities erasure is what it implies about the Foundation's relationship to its own history. An organization obsessed with documentation, classification, and permanent record keeping has at least one chapter of its own past that it decided was too dangerous to preserve. If the Foundation will erase its own institutional memory, the question of what else has been quietly removed from the archive becomes considerably harder to ignore. The insurgency conspiracy and the schism cover-up. The Foundation has weathered internal rebellions before. Splinter groups of personnel who concluded that the Council's containment over disclosure philosophy was itself the greater danger, and who attempted at various points to either expose the Foundation's existence to the public or seize control of its resources for their own ends. These insurgencies are documented in fragments, their outcomes inconsistently reported, and the Council's public position has always been that such threats were fully neutralized. The key players in any insurgency narrative are, by definition, partially redacted. The insurgents who are named in surviving documents, and the O5 members who authorized the response, which has historically involved methods the Foundation does not apply to external threats with the same lack of restraint. The lore connectivity of the insurgency conspiracy is the uncomfortable mirror it holds up to the Foundation's stated mission. People who worked inside the institution, who saw what the Council actually does at the highest levels of classification, sometimes concluded that the correct response was rebellion. The Foundation's official narrative treats this as betrayal. The fact that it happens repeatedly suggests the people closest to the truth are also the people most likely to decide the truth shouldn't be contained. The Omni inoculation and the memetic kill hazard origin. The Foundation maintains defenses against memetic and cognitohazardous threats, information that harms or kills anyone who perceives it, and some of the Council's documented countermeasures imply an institutional familiarity with these hazards that goes beyond defensive research. An organization that has fully mapped the danger of a specific category of hazard has, at some point, had to study study that hazard directly, which means someone within Foundation walls has knowingly been exposed to information capable of killing them repeatedly in a controlled setting. The key players are the research divisions responsible for cognitohazard containment, and the O5 members who approve their continued operation, fully aware of what that operation requires of the personnel involved. The lore connectivity of the Omni Inoculation program is what it reveals about the Foundation's tolerance for acceptable losses in pursuit of institutional capability. Memetic kill agents are not theoretical to the Foundation. They are a category of risk the organization has decided is worth the body count required to understand it, and the O5 Council's sign-off on that calculus is one of the clearest examples of the Council valuing capability over the individual lives spent acquiring it. Project Numa and the human psychospace inversion. Some of the Foundation's most unsettling research involves the human mind not as an organ but as a navigable space. A psychospace with its own anomalous topology that can, under the right circumstances, be entered, mapped, and altered from the outside. Projects exploring this territory sit at the boundary between psychological research and outright metaphysical intrusion, and the Council's interest in maintaining institutional access to this kind of capability says something uncomfortable about what containment is ultimately in service of. The key players are the research teams operating in this space, and the O5 members whose authorization is required for any project capable of restructuring human cognition at this level. A sign-off that implies the Council considers human psychology itself a legitimate domain for Foundation intervention. The lore connectivity of psychospace research connects directly to the broader pattern across every entry on this list. An organization founded to protect humanity's understanding of normal reality has, in its pursuit of that goal, acquired tools that let it directly edit the thing it claims to be protecting. The Foundation doesn't just contain anomalies anymore. In places like this, it has started becoming one, the Administrator's last will and testament. The Administrator is one of the few O5 adjacent figures in Foundation lore associated with anything resembling individual character, a leadership role distinct from the anonymous council seats, carrying its own continuity and its own documented final instructions for whoever inherits the position. What exactly those instructions contain and what they reveal about the Administrator's private assessment of the Foundation's mission is closely held even by council standards. The key players are the Administrator and whichever successor eventually receives the testament, inheriting not just institutional authority, but whatever private doubts, warnings, or confessions the role's previous occupant felt necessary to pass down rather than destroy. The lore connectivity of the Administrator's testament is that it suggests even the Foundation's most senior leadership maintains private reservations about the institution they run, concerns serious enough to formalize and pass on, but not serious enough apparently to act on while they held the power to do so. It is the clearest evidence that doubt exists at the very top of the organization and changes nothing about how the organization operates. SCP-001 and the true nature of the Council. SCP-001 is the Foundation's designation for the anomaly considered too significant, too paradigm-shifting, or too dangerous to assign a standard number. And because the true nature of 001 is among the most closely guarded categories of information in Foundation custody, multiple candidate explanations exist without official confirmation of which, if any, represents the canonical truth. Some candidate framing suggests the Foundation's entire mission, its founding circumstances, or the true nature of reality itself is bound up in whatever 01 actually is. The key players are, definitionally, the O5 Council members with clearance to know the truth, a circle so restricted that even senior Foundation personnel, several clearance levels below O5, may go entire careers without confirmation of what 001 actually represents. The lore connectivity of SCP-001 is structural. It sits at the apex of the entire classification system, the secret that explains why every other secret needs keeping. Whatever 001 actually is, its existence as an unconfirmed, multiply-theorized anomaly is itself the Council's most successful piece of misdirection. By refusing to settle on a single canonical truth, the Foundation has made it impossible for anyone outside the innermost circle to even know what question to ask. Researchers spend entire careers proposing and disproving 001 candidates without ever learning whether they were close. That uncertainty is not a documentation failure. It is almost certainly the design, the Red Right Hand and Mobile Task Force Alpha-1 defection. Mobile Task Force Alpha-1, callsign Red Right Hand, is the Foundation's most elite and most secretive tactical unit, answerable directly to the O5 Council rather than standard chains of command, deployed only for the organization's highest priority and most sensitive operations. A unit with that level of direct Council oversight existing primarily to handle situations too sensitive for conventional Foundation forces implies a category of threat or a category of cover-up that the rest of the organization isn't trusted to handle. The key players are Alpha-1's command structure, and the specific O5 members who issue its direct orders, bypassing the layered approval processes that govern virtually every other Foundation operation. The lore connectivity of Red Right Hand's existence is what a direct command elite unit reveals about the limits of Foundation bureaucracy. The standard chain of command exists for accountability. Alpha 1 exists specifically to operate outside it. Whatever operations the unit has been tasked with over the Foundation's history represent the Council acting with the least oversight and the most direct personal authority available anywhere in the organization's structure. An institution that builds itself around layered checks and balances, and then maintains one unit deliberately exempt from all of them, has quietly admitted that some decisions are too important to survive scrutiny. Even the Foundation's own, O5-9, the Outsider, and the Reality Anchor paradox. Among the 13 anonymous council seats, accumulated fragments of leaked testimony and internal cross-referencing have led researchers to associate certain seats with recurring behavioral and decision-making patterns, even without confirmed identities attached. The seat informally associated with reality anchoring concerns, situational authority over anomalies that threaten the basic continuity of consensus reality, represents one of the council's strangest paradoxes, a designated authority over the stability of reality itself, whose own existence within that reality is, definitionally, no more stable or protected than anyone else's. The key players are the seat's occupant and the reality-bending and reality-anchoring class anomalies whose containment decisions route through this specific council position more often than through any other seat. The lore connectivity of this seat's existence is the paradox baked into the Foundation's entire premise. An organization whose job is to keep reality intact maintains a senior position whose entire authority rests on understanding exactly how fragile that reality actually is. The person occupying that seat knows, better than almost anyone, how easily the world the rest of humanity takes for granted could come apart. 5-6. The American and the Broken Masquerade Protocol. The Foundation's central operating principle is the masquerade. Humanity must never learn that the things the Foundation contains are real. Maintaining that principle requires extraordinary measures whenever containment fails publicly, and certain documented incidents suggest the protocols for repairing a broken masquerade have, on at least one occasion, required a council-level decision so consequential that its resolution is treated as more sensitive than the original breach. The key players are whichever council seat carries primary jurisdiction over masquerade-breaking incidents, and the civilian populations whose memories, records, or in extreme cases continued existence become variables in the Foundation's repair calculus. The lore connectivity of a broken masquerade protocol is the moment the Foundation's stated mission and its actual methods diverge most starkly. Protecting humanity's normalcy, when the normal channels for doing so fail, apparently authorizes the Council to consider options that most people would recognize as a far greater violation of the people being protected than simply telling them the truth would have been. 052, the Nazarene and the Immortality Serum. Among the longest running threads in 05 adjacent speculation is the possibility that at least one council seat has occupied its position for a span of time that exceeds any plausible human lifespan, implying either an anomalous means of life extension available to the council's highest members, or a successor process so carefully managed that institutional continuity is mistaken for a single individual's endurance. Either explanation implies the council has access to longevity technology, or anomalous compounds it has never shared with the rest of humanity, or even with the rest of the Foundation. The key players are the seat in question, and whatever Foundation research division would be responsible for developing or maintaining anomalous longevity treatments at the level the speculation implies. The lore connectivity of an immortality-adjacent council seat is what it says about the Foundation's internal hierarchy of who deserves access to the most significant anomalous benefits it has ever produced. An organization that contains god-tier extension of life technology and reserves it, if the speculation holds, for its own most senior leadership rather than the dying public it claims to protect, is an organization that has quietly answered the question of whose life matters most. 051, the Founder and the Genesis Secret, the earliest history of the Foundations, who first conceived of an organization built to secure, contain, and protect anomalies, and under what specific founding circumstances, is itself classified at a level few active personnel ever reach. The founding narrative the Foundation tells about itself, the public-facing version available even to many internal researchers, may not be the full account, and what's missing from it likely explains a great deal about why the Council still operates the way it does. The key players are whichever seat carries the deepest institutional memory of the Foundation's origin and the original anomalies or events that prompted the decision to build a permanent containment apparatus rather than handle each crisis individually as it arose. The lore connectivity of the Genesis Secret is foundational in the most literal sense. Every protocol, every classification system, every ethically compromised decision documented elsewhere on this list traces back to whatever founding circumstance convinced someone that permanent, secretive, unaccountable institutional power was the correct response to the existence of anomalies. If that founding decision was made in fear, or in opportunism, or in pursuit of something other than humanity's safety, the entire structure built on top of it inherits that compromised origin. 0513 Death and the final vote. The 13th seat by the Council's own internal structure exists specifically to break ties, to be the deciding vote when the other 12 members split evenly on a decision significant enough to require full Council deliberation, a seat whose entire institutional purpose is to be the single vote that determines outcomes too consequential for ordinary majority occupies a unique and uncomfortable position. Every world-altering decision the Council has ever deadlocked on was, in the end, decided by one designation alone. The key players are the seat's occupant and the 11 other Council members whose disagreements on the Foundation's most difficult calls have repeatedly proven insufficient to produce consensus without this final intervention. The lore connectivity of the tie-breaking seat closes the loop on every secret in this list. The O5 Council presents itself publicly, insofar as it presents itself at all, as a collective body governing through deliberation and consensus. The existence of a designated tiebreaker reveals that consensus is not actually how the most important decisions get made. When the moment comes that matters most, when the Council itself cannot agree on what humanity should be protected from, or how much of itself the Foundation is willing to sacrifice to manage that protection, the entire apparatus collapses down to a single vote, cast by a single anonymous person, deciding for the rest of the world what the rest of the world will never be allowed to know was ever in question. 12 seats can argue, 1 seat decides. That asymmetry, more than any individual cover-up documented elsewhere on this list, is the truest portrait the Foundation has ever produced of what its own leadership actually is. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.